uyakwazi ukuthumela ama-email now.
We translate for those who can't understand. We write for those who can't hear. We describe for those who can't see. Subti, subtitles and accessibility for film, television and theatre. Subti.com.
Fred Film Radio, this is Nicola Comotti here at Venice Days.
Fred Film Radio, sono Chiara Nicoletti.
Angelo Acerbi pour Fred Film Radio, on est au Festival de Venise.
Fred Film Radio, z wami są Borku Terszyk.
Fred Film Radio, radio filmowe Fred, z tej strony Anna Tatarska.
Fred, the festival experience in 23 languages.
People of the universe, welcome to a brand new episode of the Big Fred Tuesday, your weekly show on all things cinema, coming at you through the power of the internet every Tuesday on Fred Film Radio. I am your humble host, Matt Micucci, and we have a hot show coming your way. I hope you're all doing well and that your cinematic explorations are proceeding accordingly. This is a show designed to let you know about what is happening in the world of film, and so it is only right that we should begin with some news and announcements from this past week. We begin with news about French filmmaker Olivier Assayas, who will be the protagonist of European film at the 21st edition of the European Film Festival in Lecce, Italy, which is finally set to take place from the 31st to the 7th of November, following its initial postponement due to the coronavirus pandemic. As such, over the course of the festival, several of his films will be screened and Assayas will appear in an in-conversation session. The tribute will, of course, be taking place within an extensive program showcasing European film, including an official competition strand featuring 12 European titles. Clint Eastwood shows no sign of slowing down, and having celebrated his 90th birthday, he has announced plans of producing, directing, and starring in an adventure drama titled Cry Macho. The project is based on the 1975 novel by N. Richard Nash of the same name about a washed-up horse trainer who schemes to make a lot of money by snatching a streetwise Mexican boy from his mother in Mexico City and delivering him to his father in Texas. This film would follow his final works, The Mule from 2018 and Richard Jewell from last year. That does it for this initial news roundup, and now it's time for me to tell you about what's in store for this episode of Big Fred Tuesday. First up, we will be speaking with Chris Hastings, Festival Director of the Satisfied Eye International Film Festival, as they prepare for their 4th edition, which will take place in Epsom, UK from the 9th to the 11th of October. Then, in honor of the current edition of the Pordenone Silent Film Festival, we will be dedicating a section of the show to silent cinema, also by chatting with Enrique Ceballos, who is a film scholar and the founder and general director of the Mexico International Silent Film Festival. And finally, we will be chatting about FERA, the Federation of European Film Directors, with its CEO, Pauline Durand-Vialle. FERA is celebrating its 40th anniversary, and it is gearing up to celebrate it with an online edition of its General Assembly. All throughout the show, we will also be revisiting interviews from our extensive archive, and of course, there will be more news about the world of film and more. So let's get ready to rumble.
Fred.
The Satisfied Eye International Film Festival will return for its 3rd season in Epsom in the UK and will run from the 9th to the 11th of October. Joining us on the Big Fred Tuesday to tell us more about it is its artistic director, Chris Hastings. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure. And let's get right into it. This I believe is the first time that Fred gets to speak about a Satisfied Eye International Film Festival.
It is the longest name for a festival in the history of festivals ever, I think.
Well, it could be right up there, but I love the name actually. And, given the fact that this is the first time that we speak about this festival, I was wondering, would you maybe like to introduce it a bit? Maybe talk about its history a bit and its mission statement.
Absolutely. Well, this is our 3rd season. I'm a filmmaker myself, so it actually started from just, I'm sure all filmmakers have these stories. I just spent a long part of my career travelling around the film festival circuit, maybe going to 20, 30 festivals a year around the world, and the experiences weren't always positive, shall we say. This is a story that, anybody who's ever been to any of the festivals will have heard me tell, but there was kind of a last incident that was the straw that broke the camel's back, where I just won an award at a festival that I couldn't attend. And they sent me the trophy, and that trophy arrived about a month after the festival, wrapped up in a box. And when I opened it, it had instructions on how to superglue it together, along with an invoice to pay for the trophy that I'd won and to pay for the postage. And it was just kind of the moment that I just thought, no, this is just getting ridiculous. There's a lot of festivals out there. There's a lot of fantastic festivals, and there's lots of festivals that I really love, but there are also a lot that take advantage of filmmakers. So I just kind of, maybe slightly egomaniacally thought, right, I want to make the kind of festival that I would like to go to. And that's where Satisfied Eye started to evolve, and where it sprang from. And that was, as I say, 3 years ago.
Right. That's an amazing story about that award. It sounds like a Kinder Surprise award or something.
Incredible. It was just, it kind of takes away from the excitement of winning an award when you have to super glue it together.
Yeah. We won't name names, but anyways, so the idea is to kind of just improve the festival experience.
Well, so there's two sides to it. So there's that part of it, and there is also the fact that I think that the whole thing with films, I'm first and foremost a writer. I am obsessed by research, spend a lot of my career doing research, and I'm one of those people who doesn't really leave the house without a survey form in my pocket to ask people various questions. So before we launched the festival in that first year, we did lots and lots of research into just normal viewing habits, normal cinema goers, not filmmakers, what they liked, what they didn't like, what they thought the film industry was, and just discovered that the vast majority of normal people, as it were, not to say that filmmakers aren't normal, but just your average cinema goer, doesn't actually really know what the film industry is. And the really scary part for me, as somebody who's worked on a lot of short films, is that most members of the public thought that all short films were made by students. And that's not to say that student films aren't great films as well, but what they thought as student films were then the kind of things that, was somebody shooting a 3-minute film with their little brother and using ketchup as blood, that kind of thing. That's what they assume. So there's this whole massive part of the industry that people didn't realise even existed, or had a completely unrealistic view of it. And the other side of the festival was to try and change that perception. So, we're very much doing it one person at a time, but introducing audiences to the fact that, there are these incredible filmmakers making incredible short films that without film festivals, they wouldn't even know existed.
Right. So is the focus on short filmmaking?
It was. So we do everything. We're features, shorts, animation, documentary. We do show everything. I think, like a lot of film festivals, shorts do tend to be the focus, just because in terms of the fact that on the independent circuit, that's where most of the work is being done, and that's where most of the the emphasis is. We see incredible ones. I say it every year that as a filmmaker myself, we get submissions, and I just think I might as well give up. Because, you'll get a film from a 17-year-old, talking of student films, we get a film from a 17-year-old student, and I think I could live to 100 and I'd never create something, that incredible. And that's kind of what we're trying to get out there. And, we're doing it every time. We get all the audiences to fill in feedback forms after every screening. And each year, the audience, tell us, we just had no idea there were these films out there and these incredible films, incredible filmmakers. So we're just trying to kind of spread the message so that people aren't just looking to go to the cinema and see, Robert Downey Jr. They do actually start actively seeking out, this kind of content.
Yeah, I mean, there's people making great stuff all the time, but the challenge then is actually getting it out there into the world. There aren't as many ways in which to do that. Sometimes the filmmakers themselves struggle to know what to do with the film once they've made it.
Absolutely. It's quite interesting. So, as a filmmaker myself, I've discovered that I think every filmmaker at one point in their life should try and run a film festival, because it is illuminating. It really is. You get a sense of what's out there, both ends of the spectrum. It's really hard, because you do receive films where you just think, yeah, you're not going to make it. I'm sorry, but it's not going to happen. And you get other people where you'll see a film and you just think, my God, I feel privileged to watch this. And then somewhere in the middle you get films that are fantastic, and you just think, I really, really hope that somebody up the hierarchy sees this and manages to give you a great career, because you really deserve it. So you really do see every single element of the spectrum of success, failure, and everything in between.
So from what you've said about the festival so far, I understand that it's as much for audiences as much as it is for the filmmakers themselves, right? I mean, what can you tell me about its industry section, for example?
Well, so, we for the first time this year, actually, so we've now just launched a magazine, an industry magazine for the festival. So it'll be the first one this year, which goes out to all sales agents and distributors. And we just want to do everything that we can to promote the filmmakers that we work with. We rather, probably slightly cheesily describe ourselves as like a little family. So we keep in touch with all the filmmakers that are official selections and win awards. So we've just produced and we'll be releasing the magazine at the same time as the festival next week. That promotes all the previous, not all, but all the selections from this year, some of the previous award winners, a bit of a story here and there about what they're doing now and where they're going, and lots of them have achieved incredible success. One of them's just had their short film picked up by Studio Canal to be turned into a feature film. We've had some of our films have gone on to be nominated or to win short film Oscars. So it's just trying to help any way we can. And our closing ceremony in our first year, we had somebody turn up and say they wanted to, invest in one of the filmmakers' films. And although, that is the kind of the top of what's happening and, the most positive things. And we're not saying that you turn up to our festival and suddenly you're having money thrown at you and big producers are going to be, helping you make your next movie, but we're also connecting the filmmakers with the audiences as well. That's a really big part of what we do, and I think there's nothing more valuable than to actually be sitting in a cinema with real audiences, because most film festivals, or a lot of the film festivals that I used to go to, you're sitting with your peers, and you'll never sit in a cinema with another filmmaker who'll come up to you and say, yeah, I didn't really like that, or that wasn't so good. Whereas audiences are quite brutal sometimes. They're really honest, and that might sound strange, but it's a really positive experience, because that honesty means that you're really learning where your film sits. And to be fair, I don't think we've ever had anybody give any negative feedback, because we do have a particularly high quality program.
Right. Speaking about like sitting in cinemas, obviously these are difficult times that we're living in. Yeah. And the pandemic has impacted the world of film at large, festivals all over the world as well. And how has it impacted the Satisfied Eye International Film Festival? It's
been a challenge, and this is one of those places where all of the responsibility falls on my shoulders, not in terms of the work or anything like that, but in terms of the decision, because we are a completely voluntary festival, completely volunteer-led. We're not financed. We don't have government funding or anything. So all the decisions, all the work, etc., is done by a team of volunteers. And in terms of the pandemic, it was very much me who decided, if we can't have a live event, we don't have a festival. I've been attending a lot of online festivals, and for me, in terms of our ethos and what we're trying to achieve, I don't think online works for us. So, to be fair, we are more hybrid than completely live, because our Q&As and some of our talks are pre-recorded. Our closing ceremony will be pre-recorded. But I was very eager that our screenings will always be live. And if they can't be live, taking them online, it's very difficult, because then every festival becomes kind of homogenized. It's very difficult to try and tell what's different from one festival to the other, because a lot of what makes festivals unique is their location, the people who are running them, etc. And if you can't see any of that, then telling the difference becomes very hard. So I was very eager that we would be a live event, but of course only if it was safe, only if the government would allow it. I'm actually I'm high risk myself, so I take safety very seriously. And we wanted to make sure that we had a venue that would allow us to do that. So we're at the Odeon Cinemas, who have been fantastic, to be quite honest. We're just hiring the venue, so it's not like I'm getting anything out of promoting them. But they completely clean the entire venue and screen between every single block of films. They make sure the social distancing is going on and that people are wearing masks, etc. So we just wanted to make sure that we had an event where people can actually sit and watch the film, because when a filmmaker makes a movie, that's how he's intending it to be seen on a screen, not on a laptop or somebody's TV at home.
We'll be back for more on this year's edition of Epsom's Satisfied Eye International Film Festival when we return.
Fred.
We're back with Chris Hastings, Artistic Director of the Satisfied Eye International Film Festival in Epsom, UK. And earlier, Chris, you mentioned something that caught my ear. You said that a lot of what makes each festival unique is the location. So that prompts the question, what is it about Epsom that makes this festival so unique?
Well, Epsom is, Epsom's one of those really strange places in terms of the fact that you talk to anybody in Epsom, we think we're world famous, because we've got the Epson Derby, which is allegedly a world famous race. It's the location of where a suffragette famously threw herself in front of the King's horse at the start of the 20th century and died, and became something of a martyr. And we're obviously also famous for Epsom salts. We did a survey last year, I think, that we contacted lots of previous filmmakers to find out what they knew about Epsom and, how much they knew about all of these historical facts, because we are quite a historical town, and discovered literally zero of the people who filled in our survey knew about all of these facts. So it's one of those things that we are a historical town. We're literally a stone's throw from London. Well, literally, that's a complete lie. It can't be literally a stone's throw. We're 30-minute train ride from London. You'd have to have a very strong arm. But what we normally do, we then have like networking events in London and bring people down to the festival, which sadly, once again, we couldn't do that this year. So we're keeping within the same location. But I think location is important to most festivals, and I know there are festivals, I don't know, somewhere in Canada where they take you on a walk into the mountains as part of the experience, and we tend to do things here. Last year we were actually in Kingston because our venue wasn't available here last year, so we just shifted to Kingston for a year and took people on rides down the river as part of the festival. So I think it's a festival, when it's done right, is more than just a festival. It's an experience.
Right. And, before I forget to ask, what are the dates for this year?
So it's the 9th to the 11th of October.
Right.
So it's the Friday to the Sunday, all day, and then we're screening our pre-recorded closing award ceremony on the Monday night. So that'll actually be screened on the 12th. And
just so to make sure that I've got it right, it's a mix of in-person events with live events and
so
online events.
Yeah, so all of our screenings are live. Everything else isn't. So what we're doing is we've got pre-recorded Q&As, which will be screened after the films, actually in the cinema, but they will also be available online as well.
Oh, right. So the films are going to be in physical screenings.
Exactly. Yeah. So the you won't be able to see the films online. So that was the decision we made. It's a really hard thing. It's the question that everybody gets asked at the moment is about, the power of Netflix and streaming, and the fact that, festivals are currently trying to compete with Netflix and Amazon and everybody else. And given the choice between sitting there and watching a film that's 20 minutes long with with actors you've never heard of, directed by somebody you've never heard of, people are more likely just to switch over to Keanu Reeves in John Wick on Amazon, on Netflix. And, there is a certain element of truth to that. So it means you do still have to do things, when you're doing anything online to engage. And I think that's the big challenge at the moment.
And it's a shame because, this should be an age of discovery and discovering films online should be something that people are really passionate about, discovering new things.
Absolutely. And I do think, everybody criticises people like Netflix, but I do think Netflix are actually good for the industry because, it's only since Netflix came along that people have been far more willing to watch documentaries. They've been far more willing to watch subtitled films. And, you look at that they have their list of the top 10 most popular things on Netflix at the moment. Quite regularly you'll have a documentary in there. Quite regularly you'll have a piece of foreign cinema in there. So I do think that people like Netflix are actually broadening appetites, which can only be a good thing for festivals like this, and does show that there is appeal to audiences for things that aren't just Avengers, and use Avengers as an example. But I'm like anybody else. I love Avengers and I love Robert Downey Jr. But when you're trying to promote these other things, people do start to think, well, the perfect example is whenever we're flyering for the festival, we go out with flyers in our hands, with our festival T-shirts on, giving out flyers saying, we'd like to come to our film festival. And the question we get asked most is, who's in it? What film? Which directors are coming? And it's like, well, no, that's not what this is about. And some people are willing to stand there and have a conversation with you and learn about the industry, and other people are just like, no, I want Keanu Reeves. And if he's not in it, I'm not coming. And that's kind of the big challenge, and that's the mindset that we're slowly trying to shift.
So, speaking of this year's program, what can you tell me about it?
It's our program gets better year on. I think it's the fact in the first year we had a fantastic program, and I think we really feel an affinity with a lot of the filmmakers. But then what happens as your festival becomes better known and people start realizing that you have a really strong program, you get more and more submissions. The quality of the submissions improves. So I think in our first year we had like 2 premieres. This year we've got 30 premieres. In our first year, we had films from 10 different countries. This year, from 30 countries. We've got 90 films in total. Most of them are short films, but we do, we have, as an example, we've got a couple of Oscar winners in there. We've got our strongest section always, and it's very much what I was talking about in terms of watching films by 17-year-olds and thinking, I might as well give up. Our strongest section this year by far is our student filmmaker section, which we are not calling our student filmmaker, and our student filmmaker trophy is now being changed to one to watch, purely on the basis, as I say, because members of the public, you mentioned student, and they have this immediate preconceived, it's almost a prejudice of what a student film is. So we're trying to change that mindset. So I think some of my favourite films this year are all in the student film category. We've got a film like Dog Watch, which is a film that is just so multi-layered and so complex, about somebody who loses their job and is asked to, just because of, it's a bit like the system here, you have to take a job that you're vastly overqualified for while his mother is at home dying and it's just this brutal film that I just look at it and I just think, I want the filmmaker to come to our festival because I want to talk to them about it and I want to engage and find out where the story came from. And that's the case with so many of these films. But we've got an incredible selection this year. We've got every single section you look at, whether it's documentaries, we've got film Underage Engineers, whether or not it's shorts, films like Dog Watch. We've got Neighbour's Window, which won the Oscar this year for best live action short. We've got feature films like Dog's Death, which is this agonizingly painful Argentinian movie about a vet who accidentally kills one of his patients, and it goes into this horrible spiral of events, and one of our judges described it as being like something out of Fawlty Towers. And animation is incredibly strong as well. Our animation is one of those sections where each year we really struggle to fit it into one program. We could probably have an entire day of animation, because I think animation in the world at the moment is incredibly strong.
It sounds like a very varied program.
Absolutely, eclectic is always the word I use. It's like we have a section called Best of British this year. Well, we always have a kind of Best of British section, and it's subtitled because people immediately, well, it's British films, and therefore, why is it subtitled? But we've got a film made by a British, somebody who lives not far from here, who's made a film about people in Iraq who refused to fight during Saddam Hussein's regime, and Saddam Hussein had their ears cut off rather delightfully, and they suffer this incredible stigma from that, because they spend the rest of their lives being seen as a coward, and it's very visible for all to see, because you see anybody who doesn't have ears, right, they're a coward during Saddam Hussein's regime. And this is somebody local who made that documentary. It's set in Iraq, and obviously it's subtitled. And, so we have a real mix of films in there that probably aren't what you'd expect when you go and see the certain programs.
Well, Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you about Satisfied Eye International Film Festival. What's the best way that people can keep up with news and updates about the festival?
Satisfiedeye.com, nice and easy to remember, or once again, facebook.com/Satisfied Eye.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Best of luck.
Lovely. Thank you very much for having me.
Fred Film Radio.
One of the films that has been making waves as of late is Regina King's One Night in Miami, which premiered at the 77th Venice International Film Festival. Chiara Nicoletti caught up with King for a virtual chat on the movie. And here is that interview.
How does it feel to show this film today, since it's a story about the past, about this particular time in history, but at the same time it feels so contemporary in so many themes that are treated?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons for most of us involved with One Night in Miami, the reason why we became a part of it, because the story for Black Americans is a story that, unfortunately, those were the conversations that were happening 60 years ago, and these are the conversations that are happening now. Now, when we started filming it, did we know that we would be in this, powder keg moment that we're in right now? Absolutely not. But the conversations were relevant when Kemp wrote the script, when we started shooting. And it feels kind of like one of those things where it was meant to be, even though our intention wasn't that it would happen during a time where like an uprising, if you will, is going on in our country. But with the pandemic happening, we kind of thought that the film was we would push it back because we didn't know what the climate of going to theaters, what it was going to be like. And then a couple months after the pandemic hit, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery had both had been murdered. And it just, for the producers, everyone involved, we were like, no, this has to happen now. This needs to come out now. So I feel like fate always had this planned out this way, but maybe we're lucky and we are going to have the opportunity to be a piece of art out there that moves the needle in the conversation for real transformative change. That's if we do just a little bit of that, then we've gone further than what we would have ever imagined when we started shooting in November of last year.
The film also offers a sort of counter-narrative in the representation of black male on film and television, and this is another way the film can move the needle. Do you agree?
Well, I mean, yes, definitely. I think a lot of black people, when you see the news and it would always seem to be that when something was being reported on, they would seem to find the black person that least represented the black people that that are your family members. And I mean, I don't want to speak for Kemp, but I feel like one of the inspirations was that you can use these 4 icons as a voice for all of the black men not all of the black men that he knew, but the black men that he was friends with, family members with, that are articulate and have thoughts that are complex, and it seems to me that people can receive the idea that a black man looks like this and talks like this and feels like this. They receive it, they being the audience, receive it, I think, with open arms when you're hearing it through the lens of these iconic these luminaries.
Hey, you'll be listening to an extract from the official press conference of One Night in Miami by Regina King in competition at the 77th Venice International Film Festival. I'm Chiara Nicoletti and this is Fred, the Festival Insider.
Fred Film Radio.
In this section of these shows, I usually like to talk about events in the history of cinema. And this one, on this particular episode of the Big Fred Tuesday, is a part 2 of sorts. Because last week, I talked about the little known about event, that is known as the Big Broadcast of 1928, a radio broadcast where the voices of a number of actors and directors were heard on the radio for the first time. This was, of course, the silent era. This gave me the chance to talk a little bit about the shift from silent films to talkies and emphasize how the shift affected the film industry in incalculable ways. I had also promised to talk about how the careers of the actors and directors who took part in said broadcast were affected after the broadcast itself, and that's what I'm about to do. So I'm going to begin with Douglas Fairbanks. So having played such heroic figures as Zorro and Robin Hood, to name but 2, Douglas Fairbanks' career in talkies kicked off with an ambitious version of The Taming of the Shrew by William Shakespeare. However, the audience didn't buy it, and he decided to retire from film altogether in 1934 after this disappointment. He died 5 years later of a heart attack after a long illness. His wife, Mary Pickford, a major figure in the history of women in film, sought to outgrow her image as America's sweetheart. But the audience did not take to the change and generally refused to accept her in more mature roles. While she lived up to 1979 and even became the vice president of United Artists in 1936, out of frustration, she retired from film acting in 1933. Norma Thomas, one of the most popular film actresses of her day, and one of the most elegant and glamorous film stars of the Roaring Twenties, well, she took voice acting lessons, and her acting was deemed good. But after starring in a series of box office failures, her popularity dramatically declined. Retiring in the early 30s, she is remembered during this period, and by that I mean that her retirement is remembered, because she allegedly would tell adoring fans asking for her autographs something along the lines of, "Get away, dears, I don't need you anymore, and you don't need me." John Barrymore's downfall came as a result of his alcohol and substance abuse. He was a theatrically trained actor and no doubt could have been a tremendous screen actor of early talkies, at least to a greater extent than he became. But by the end of the 30s, his acting had lost focus and he even began forgetting lines. In an infamous article in the Independent Film Journal, Harry Brandt called him box office poison and a dead cat. He died after collapsing during a live radio broadcast in 1942. D.W. Griffith, well, here's a man whose cinematic genius is looked upon as problematic due to the incredible racism of The Birth of a Nation from 1915. The way I like to see it is that he sort of represents all that is great and all that is horrible about silent film. Griffith was skeptical of audio technologies, and while he directed 2 soundies, including an Abraham Lincoln biographical film in 1930, his characteristic grandiose style suffered greatly from it. He died in poverty in 1948. The remarkable Gloria Swanson quit while she was ahead, though her 1929 film The Trespasser, filmed both in silent and talking versions, was a hit. She decided to stop film acting and started an invention and patents company that kept her busy and wealthy. Wow. Of course, she returned with a masterful role in Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard from 1950, and as a vegetarian and health food advocate, she lived up to be 84 years old. In the years following the broadcast, Dolores Del Rio achieved more success, but after becoming a Hollywood icon, she decided to return to her native Mexico, where she became one of the most important figures of what is commonly referred to as the golden years of Mexican cinema. And of course, she also continued to record music. Charlie Chaplin, well, what can we say about him? The world continues to celebrate him to this day as one of the most important artists of the 20th century. And it's hard to travel to any place anywhere in the world where you won't find a reproduction of his little tramp character. After retiring the Tramp, he directed such acclaimed works as The Great Dictator and Limelight. And though he became less prolific and ran into major trouble with American authorities that accused him of being a communist, he died happily in Switzerland, aware of his status and importance, one Christmas Day in 1977.
Fred Film Radio.
My next guest on today's program is film scholar Enrique Ceballos, who is conducting an interesting course that includes a study on gender representation and mysticism and will begin on the 19th of October. He'll tell us more about that. Enrique is also the founder and general manager of the Mexico International Silent Film Festival, so we'll be talking about that as well. So lots to discuss. Enrique, welcome to the show.
Hello, Matt. I'm very happy to be here and talking with you. Well, after 2 years, I think that we've met in Pordenone Silent Film Festival. Well, it's great being here with you again.
In fact, the main topic of the conversation of the conversation that we will be recording today is actually going to be silent films. And because of that, I sort of wanted to open up our discussion, if you will, by asking you a very general question, and feel free to answer it in whatever way you like. But, you know, what is it about silent cinema that fascinates you?
Well, I think silent cinema let us break the verticality of time and space, and when we accessed these experiences, these cinema experiences, we can question them and we can talk about them and make them our own experiences, bring them back into the present. And I just love that, that we can break the time and break space, just beautiful experiences. Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by break the time?
We can go back to previous wars, previous social conflict, and we can talk about it, and we can relate with those conflicts and with those battles and protests and maybe stereotypes, maybe human typing. And we can question them, That's how we can break the time, yeah.
I understand exactly what you're saying. In fact, it is a concern that I think about a lot, come to think of it, when it comes to silent film, is that sometimes I get the impression that people who are passionate about silent film and preservation of silent film are rather conservative, particularly, as we know, because early cinema features many things that may be seen as morally and politically problematic nowadays. Mm-hmm. The classic example, of course, being Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith. Mm-hmm. Yet you and I would say, and other people like us have a rather modern mentality, a hatred for discrimination and so on. Do you ever, I guess from what you said, you think about these things. There is a problematic side to silent cinema, but it is one that can empower us ultimately.
Yes, I think that we cannot erase history by censoring these films, any film actually. So we should bring them back, see them, question them, talk about them. And I think it can help us grow together and redirect our lives, our societies. I repeat, we cannot censor any of these films. We should celebrate them and question them at the same time.
Right. And, in terms of Mexico, would you say that Mexico looks after its film heritage well, also in celebrating these films, as you said, but preserving them as well?
Well, the thing with Mexico is that sadly, we have only 2% surviving rate of our films, of our silent films. So that's a bummer. But even with that, We can talk about things like stereotyping women, because our country is very full of machism, and we can talk about masculinities, and I think that our surviving silent films allow us to talk about social experiences, even if we only have 2% of them surviving.
Wow. 2% is really a small percentage.
Yes.
What was Mexico's cinematic output like in the early years of cinema? Was the production system a healthy production system? Were there a lot of films being made?
No, we had a lot of problems. Even if we talk about an industry of early Mexican cinema, we have to point that it was like a very problematic industry, because all of this European influence, North American influence, everybody wanted to try and repeat those models in Mexico. And I think we were in search of an identity. So yes, our industry was problematic in that sense. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that Mexico eventually found its own cinematic identity, even when we think about perhaps contemporary cinema?
Yeah, I think that we can talk about a Mexican cinema identity right now, of course. But even in those early days, during the Mexican Revolution, we found a very powerful source for Mexican identity, even if we had a lot of European and North American influence in our cinema. We found a beautiful, powerful source of identity within the Mexican Revolution and the cinema that came from it, the documentary films that came from it.
Yes. This is just a coincidence, but I was reading recently about Dolores Del Rio, and I felt like I should just drop her name because she was such an important figure for Hollywood cinema as well as for Mexican filmmaking.
Yeah, she was like our great diva. She is like our great diva, besides Maria Felix and Lupe Vélez and other incredible women that, they started a career in Hollywood, but then around the 40s, they came to Mexico and started their own path, and yes, Dolores Del Rio, she's an icon, an absolute icon.
Speaking of great women in cinema, I'd like to maybe hear about your latest course. Would you like to maybe introduce it? I thought the topic was very interesting.
Yeah, speaking of women and gender perspective, I've been giving a course called The Other Film Histories, Mysticals, Witches, and Heretics. I think it's important that we can talk about gender stereotypes and representations, in such powerful manifestations around horror cinema and fantasy cinema. So we will be revising the filmographies of Luis Buñuel, Dreyer, Dario Argento, and other filmmakers that were working at the time with this kind of representations and figures, these mystical, supernatural figures that they are also important for thinking our social representations and social dynamics as well. Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me more about the significance of mysticism in cinema, especially in the context of your course?
Yes, that's a great question, because talking about mysticals for this course in particular is to talk about these women that were recluded in convents. We will talk about nuns that were experiencing hallucinations and dialogues with God and with the Virgin. Those figures are called mysticals in some studies, mystical women. So we will be talking about them, because there is a lot of representation of them in cinema, and it is important for gender representation and gender stereotypes as well.
We'll be back with Enrique Ceballos after this short break.
Fred.
We're back with film scholar Enrique Ceballos. Before the break, we were talking about your course on gender, representation and mysticism in film. And so I gather that the course covers not only silent film, which we were talking about earlier, but also modern films. And you mentioned Dario Argento, for example. So that takes us into grounds that are a little more contemporary, perhaps.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We will start, of course, with Georges Méliès and Alice Guy. They were both pioneers and they were both working with mystical and fantasy cinema. But we will, of course, revise a more deep filmography, I think well until the 80s. Mm-hmm.
Do you find that gender representation remains a problem in contemporary cinema?
Yeah, I think even on this day, we have a lot of trouble surrounding representation, gender representation, because of, this flexibility in our identities that are now taking the screen. It's been great these past few years, but also new dialogues, new conversations are emerging from these new opportunities. So we should talk about them and talk about the problematics, what are we lefting out and what are we including, in these new representations. I think it is still problematic and important.
Yeah, it takes a long time to evolve, right? I mean, even in the sense of the evolution of the ways in which gender is represented in cinema. As we look back on cinema, giant steps have been done, but it did take a long time, and it's probably going to take a long time. I think the way in which we can realize that, of course, is through courses such as yours.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope that we can dialogue about these other film histories. It is important for me to question the canon, to question the great masters and to bring them back to our era and to ask them what can they say to us,
Hey, so how are you doing this course? Are you doing it digitally?
Yes, it will be an online course. So you can write to otrashistoriascine@gmail.com. It is the email. Maybe I can send it to you so you can reply it on the post of this interview. So inscriptions are open. Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's a Spanish language course, so anybody interested in applying should know that. But are you? And this is a question related to definitely contemporary times. How are you finding, doing these projects digitally in the times of the coronavirus?
Well, it's been a big challenge, because we no longer have our venues, for working, for meeting, for, creating together. But I think there's hope, I remain hopeful that we can go back to our spaces, to meeting face to face and to create new ways, for conversation and for, question all of our cinemas. Yeah.
Speaking of which, we will return to this topic because I also wanted to talk about the Mexico International Film Festival, which you founded and are the general manager of. And just for our listeners who are not familiar with it, would you like to tell me a little bit and introduce it? I mean, when was it founded and also why was it founded?
Yeah, it was founded in 2016. And we felt the need, to bring those films back, to that 2%. We needed to bring it back to our eyes our ears, our bodies, and to experience these very first few days of cinema in our country. We did not have a festival, that was taking care of this beautiful time in cinema. So we just felt the need, to bring it back to our society, especially in our city, Puebla. We are not celebrating the festival in Mexico City. We celebrated in Puebla, which is like a very important city too within Mexico. And, it's a colonial city. And whenever our guests when they come to Puebla, they really enjoy the experience, the screenings, the cinema concerts, and also having beautiful tours, within the streets and enjoying delicious food, because in Puebla we have a very, very good food, and it's quite an experience. Actually, last year we had Paolo Tosini, Eli Vrongen, and Maggie Henfeld. They came to Puebla, and we all enjoy our time together and enjoy the screenings. We had, for example, silent comedians. These so-called nasty women in silent cinema. These beautiful comedians that are being. They're being, recently studied by Maggie, by Elif, and it was such a wonderful time with them.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of names that are familiar to the silent film community of contemporary times. Mm-hmm. Hey, so will it be taking place this year?
Yes, we will have our 5th edition between November 24th and 28th. Yes, it will be an online festival. But I'm sure you all will enjoy our proposal. We have prepared a Latin American fiesta, because it is important for us to bring back also the film heritage of Latin America. Argentina, Chile, Colombia. So this year we will celebrate Latin America, in its uniqueness. Mm-hmm.
Obviously it'll be taking place online. There's challenges that come with that, but it's remarkable that you guys are still going to hold an edition of the festival. Is there anything about the program that you can anticipate?
Yes, we will have, as a special event, the cinema concert of the Phantom Train, El Tren Fantasma. It is one of the feature films that survives from 1927. It is directed by Gabriel Garcia Moreno, and it is a thriller. Basically, it is a thriller, a beautiful and well-directed thriller that in which we see, these dangerous scenes and suspenseful scenes. The protagonists over the train and running away from the bad guys and rescuing the heroine. And it's such a suspenseful trip that you should please experience it. You should accompany us. Yeah.
And it's great to end our conversation with this recommendation. Enrique, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for joining us, and I wish you all the best with all of the different projects that you got going on. You're doing a lot.
It's been a pleasure, Matt. Thank you. And I've been doing a lot, but also, accompanied by my beautiful team in Mexico Silent Film Festival, especially.
Thanks very much.
Fred.
Iconic filmmaker Bruce LaBruce presented his latest film, Saint Narcissus, at the Giornate degli Autori strand of the 77th Venice International Film Festival. And that's where Angelo Acerbi caught up with him to find out all about it. Take a listen.
Your film is, let's say, if we have to short it out in a few words, it's a drama on incest and narcissism. Is it correct?
Yep. With a little bit of, religious and sexual ecstasy thrown in.
Exactly, as like spices, to spice it up. How did you come up with the story of this film, first of all?
It really started with the idea of twincest. So the original working title was Twincest. In the gay world, as they call it, there's in the porn world, there's like a quite strongly developed idea of twincest movies, actual twins having sex. And it occurred to me that it's kind of one of the most socially acceptable, or it is probably the most socially acceptable form of incest between twins, because people kind of can understand where it comes from because they look identical twins. They look identical. It's like if you saw someone that looked identical to you, you'd probably want to fuck them, right? So,
because you love yourself so much.
Yeah. So, I mean, for narcissists especially, but twins have an excuse, So
you're right.
So that was kind of the starting point, but I wanted to make it a kind of meditation on other things like narcissism, but in terms of the twincest or incest in general, there's different kinds of incest in the film. There's the incest, even though it's not technically incest, between the mother and the daughter of her former lover. So in a way, she's acting as a mother figure to her, but she's also they're also lovers. So that's a kind of incest. And then even between the twin Dominique and the daughter, the daughter figure of his mother, it's almost like brother and sister incest.
Yeah, there's always,
and then in the church, it's the father-son.
Exactly,
right?
Everything is really blurry, and all relationships are not exactly defined 100%.
Yeah, and some are more acceptable than others, but there's always this frisson of taboo behind them all. Yeah.
If we want to talk about the film in terms of aesthetics, it's a very 70s film.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's set in the 70s, but the taste of it is
early
really
70s.
Early 70s. Mm-hmm. And it's shot on digital, but it looks like it's shot on film. It has the kind of impurities that film has.
Mm-hmm. And we did that in camera. We didn't do it with filters at all. My cinematographer Michel Lavaux comes from that era of 70s Quebecois cinema, and he worked with great Quebec auteurs like Michel Brault and Claude Jutra, and we really tried to go to recreate that atmosphere by using the lenses from the 70s, including these really big zoom lenses, and also the lighting kit. We shot it we lit it in a style from that era. So, but it was our whole point was to do it in camera.
Listen, you did this film with, you've always been a very controversial artist, if we can say so, since the very beginning. I don't know
why.
I don't know. It comes with the package.
It's natural for me.
Yeah, exactly. Since your first films, and you did some porn, you did some, but you are also a very a media artist, not only a cinema artist, because you wrote books, you directed operas, so you did theater. So photography. Yeah. How can you convey all this creativity into all this medium at the same time? Because you are a very prolific artist, actually.
I also consider promotion an art,
an additional job,
and publicity.
Yeah.
No, it's an art. Because I started out, pre-internet, doing small experimental films, fanzines, and I learned in the 80s how to promote yourself out of nothing, and considered it part of the creative process. So that's it. I mean, it all comes from the same place. If you just have a certain identity as a creative person, then you apply that creativity to all medium equally.
Yeah.
So it's not a problem for me. It all comes from the same place.
So it does, and it's not an effort. It's not painful or heavy to do.
No,
it's just natural.
But sadly, I mean, it's maybe unfortunate. I still regard it as almost like, it doesn't seem like a job to me. So like to make even Saint Narcisse, it was just all about the process of making it, and it was just such a great adventure and pleasure to make it that it doesn't even seem like a job. Yeah.
Listen, how did you evolve or change your attitude from No Skin Off My Hands to Saint Narcissus in terms of filmmaking? So, which is, how is your aim in filmmaking change in this length of time?
It's more about process, like my early work was more experimental and obviously no budget, but it was about creating something out of nothing, learning to use your shortcomings, like your limitations as your strengths is an important kind of mantra, So, but the earliest stuff is guerrilla. So no permits, no permission. You work on adrenaline. Sometimes you find a location the day of shooting. You decorate a location on the fly. You even pull somebody into the film off the street or whatever. So that was for a long time. That's how that was my creative process. So the last couple of films, especially Durand-Vialle and Saint Narcissus, have been made with union crews in a more industry style, hierarchical kind of
more
style.
adult way.
I guess you
probably,
would say, maybe.
If we can say so. Yeah.
Yeah. Although I still make porn, which is still a little more free form.
Free flowing.
But for me, I like both. I like both processes. It was fascinating to me finally to make a film within the more kind of industry process. It was a steep learning curve in a way, but and very challenging. But these films are more narrative. They're more pre-planned, premeditated. There's not as much spontaneity, so it is a different process, a different feeling making them, but I like them both. I don't see why you have to choose a side all the time.
Absolutely. Please go on doing both.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One last question, going back to the film. The film has this kind of thriller taste too, because it's like there is like a thriller, dark, like noir atmosphere, mystery. Did you have any movies in mind or any director in mind while shooting this on that specific issue?
Yeah, I mean, De Palma. 70s De Palma. The two main films I was referencing were Sisters and Obsession, which both have incest themes, and of course, the flashbacks were in my film are a tribute to kind of 70s De Palma. When it flashes back to the lesbians having furtive sex in the hotel room, and it's all gauzy and that's and showing the baby and tracking over to the baby in the carriage. That's a complete kind of De Palma move. But also Nicholas Roeg in the editing, because we tried to do some editing, like when the two twins kind of almost meet for the first time. There's these quick cuts to the mother who kind of senses psychically that they're they're coming closer together, and so a bit of
so this is really 70s. This is after 70s,
and Quebec's, and the other big influence was the Quebec filmmaker Paul Almond, who was married to Geneviève Bujold, and they made this trilogy of films together, Isabelle, Act of the Heart, and Journey. And they are also filled with ghosts from the past, incest. There's a scene in The Act of the Heart where Donald Sutherland is a priest who has sex with Geneviève Bujold on the altar in the church. Okay, and then she goes to the park and sets herself on fire. So we can like see a martyr,
we can clearly see your inspirations on this, on this specific film. Yes. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to Bruce here, director of Saint Narcissus here at the Giornata degli Autori. From the Venice Festival, I'm Angelo Cerbi for Fred, the Festival Insider. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Grazie.
Fred Film Radio.
Joining us at this time is Pauline Durand-Vialle, CEO of FERA, the Federation of European Film Directors, which is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year and will soon be holding its annual General Assembly. Pauline, welcome to the show.
Hi, Matt. Great to be here.
I'm excited about talking about the Federation of European Directors, and in looking up info about it, I thought it curious to have come across on the website a question that seemed very simple to me, but sometimes the simple things are the ones that maybe get a little disregarded and sometimes don't get asked as much. But because we are talking about a federation of European directors, I thought I would take a hint from it and begin the interview by simply asking you, if this is an interesting angle, what is a director?
What is a director? That's a great question, actually. Believe it or not, I've been working for directors for over 10 years now. So, actually asking me to define it is quite the challenge you're putting me into. Basically, a director is the main author of the creative process of creating a film or a TV series episode. It's the person who is in charge of setting everything into motion and make it until the very end of the process. Because when you start working on creating a film or an episode for a TV series or a TV series itself, you start by having an idea and then you write it up and then you shoot it with tons of other people involved, actors, technicians, and a lot of people from the production side as well. Then once that's finished, you have to edit the rushes you got from the shooting, post-production them, and mix them. And in the end, you're going to have the final film or the final episode. And the director is the person which basically is present throughout the process to make it creatively coherent, let's say.
Recognize the centrality of the importance of the director within a film production. That brings us to the Federation of European Film Directors. And I was telling you before we actually started recording that this might be the first time that Fred actually gets to talk with someone from the Federation of the European Film Directors. And so my question is very simple. Would you be able to sort of introduce it, maybe tell us a little bit about its history and what it does, essentially?
Well, I mean, our federation is called FERA for short. It's an acronym based on the French Fédération Européenne des Réalisateurs de l'Audiovisuel. And this organization was founded in 1980, which is why in 2020 we're celebrating our 40th anniversary. And basically what we do is that we gather all the national organizations which represent filmmakers and directors in particular. So we are an umbrella organization. We have members, I think, in over 35 countries now, mainly, of course, in Europe, since we're a European federation. The organization was basically created because there was a sense of community around European filmmaking that directors felt really strongly. So it really started out as a network. And as years went by and as the industry changed and as the European Union began to develop a sort of a sense of the media landscape and the media regulation, we started to basically lobby the European Union. So we have two missions at our core. One is to get people together and get them to talk about their craft, about how it's evolving, and what the commonality is for the European community of directors on the one end, and the other is advocacy work at European level.
Right. And, how have the ways in which the Federation sort of does that evolved over the years?
Well, I mean, it evolved a lot, I think, over the last 20 years, because you really had the sense that with the changes that occurred in our industry, there was a sort of a greater attention which was brought to it by institutions like the European Commission, the European Parliament, but also at national level, you had a lot of media regulation which developed around broadcasting and then around streaming platforms nowadays. And in order to make sure that all of this is sort of consistent with the idea of keeping European audiovisual creation unique, alive, strong, with diverse voices, with proper, let's say, unique storytelling with a very great diversity of voices, then we felt like we had to chip in.
But it must be challenging as well to kind of cover such an extensive and varied territory. I'm sure that the different countries have their own, each different policies and all of that. I mean, is it a challenging effort?
It is. Yeah. It's my life. So it's really, really interesting because we do we do try to find common ground all the time. And even when you're between very, very different countries with very different authors' rights traditions or media regulation habits, you will always find that what unifies our community is the sense that a director is a storyteller, and no matter what type of production he or she works on, there are a few cornerstones that they don't want to give up on. There is creative leadership, artistic freedom, and even when you're working on commissioned work where maybe your artistic vision has a more limited scope, nonetheless, there are skills put into play that people are really keen to have recognized and to be able to basically use. So that's our common ground. And then you can always find a way, to reconcile different traditions when you have such a strong core commonality in a community.
And it must have been very challenging times too with the coronavirus pandemic, right?
Yeah, really it has been, and it still is. I mean, we are very challenged by this crisis across the value chain in the audiovisual industry, because of course you have the relationship to the audience, which is very much changed. People cannot go to the cinema in the same way that they used to, but they can watch their smaller screens and a lot of content that's available there. And what does it mean exactly for the works that European directors actually create? Are they still seen in the same way? Are they accessed in the same way? Are they actually accessible at all on these new sort of dominant way to, in brackets, consume the work that they do? It's quite challenging on that end, but it's also very challenging from a day-to-day work perspective when you go on a set with a mask and protective gear, which means that you cannot have the same level of interaction that you used to with the people on set, with your technicians, with your actors around the camera, and you have to basically put more time and more resources in making exactly the same thing. If you can do that thing in this level of constraint. So it's really very challenging at every stage of the production of audiovisual works. And we know that there's going to be a huge impact of the crisis over time for us. Yeah.
Right. I was going to ask you whether the challenges were spread out across all stages of the film process. But I guess, yes, as you mentioned, it is.
It really is. I mean, it's actually very interesting in a way, because, directors are, to some part of what they do, they're really good at solving problems because they have to oversee a creative process over very different stages of production. But this level of problem solving is kind of beyond the realm of one single person or even a team of people. You really have to completely change the way you work, not only on a daily basis, but even completely change your mindset. And when you're writing something these days and you're going to have to face these constraints on set, you have to change the way you write, even change the way you imagine what you're going to create on the screen in the end.
We'll be back in just a little while to talk more about FERA, the Federation of European Film Directors, in a moment.
Fred Film Radio.
And we're back with Pauline Durand-Vialle, CEO of the Federation of European Film Directors, which is celebrating its 40th edition. So, the Federation's annual General Assembly is fast approaching and has been adapted to counter the challenges brought on by the coronavirus pandemic as a series of online webinars, essentially. But before we get into that, Pauline, would you be able to tell us about the role of the annual General Assembly?
Well, when you have a community of over 40 members, it is very important that once a year they get to meet. You have, of course, a mandatory obligation to do so because that's the way a structured nonprofit works in any case. But even for the very core mission of our organization, it's absolutely essential that people get to meet at least once a year. So we try to do that more regularly usually, but these days we can't meet physically. And that's quite the challenge as well, because, it's interesting to see how in our industry, and particularly for directors, they tend to be quite isolated in the way they work, project per project, with different teams every time. And as a community, it's really important that they get together once in a while. And the fact that we couldn't do it physically this year is a challenge, as we are all facing these days, but we're trying to make the most of it by changing the format a little bit.
Were you hoping that you would be able to do it physically?
Well, we hoped for a few months, and then, we kind of realized that it would not be reasonable. And on top of that, I mean, I can sense also that a lot of people are keen to work when the option is open. So, you don't want to keep people off an opportunity to go and do what they do.
And so I understand that this year's edition will take the shape of a series of online webinars, right? So before I actually forget, what are the dates for it, and where will people be able to gain access to these webinars?
So the webinars, the public ones, will take place on October 6 and October 13 in the afternoon, and all the links can be found on our website, screendirectors.eu. There's going to be a live stream on YouTube.
Right. And as you mentioned, there are public ones that everyone can access. And then, of course, there's probably some webinars for members only.
Exactly.
And what can you tell me about the program itself?
Well, we thought long and hard about the program, because this is such a unique year. This is such a unique moment. And on top of that, it's an anniversary. So it felt like we had to sort of really find the right angles. And so, because this situation that we all find ourselves into is challenging us all, I mean, in every aspect of our lives, we thought that, a good way to approach it would be to first focus on the actual craft of filmmaking by looking into what makes a European filmmaker in 2020 and what the creative space of European filmmakers is today and what it will be tomorrow. So we have a great panel to discuss this with two TV directors, Renaud Bertrand and James Oz, and Isabel Quachet from Spain, and Teona Mitevska from North Macedonia. We hope to have a great conversation with them about how they actually handle this creative space in their daily work, and how this is going to be like what that's going to look like in the future. And the second panel, the second session on October 13 is basically a little bit more forward looking, in the sense that we want to try and discuss very freely what European film's future actually is, because we are all in crisis management mode at the moment in our industry, and everybody's trying to, get the next gig going and to sort of deal with the constraints. But the question in everyone's mind that we don't have really time to tackle yet is, how are things going to look in 3 years, 5 years? And with the rise of global streaming platforms actually producing locally in Europe, how is the independent production segment of our industry going to survive and look like in the next 5 to 10 years? And to discuss this, we have also a great panel with people from actually, with Werner Herzog coming to chip in, and Agnieszka Holland, two filmmakers that, I mean, I don't know about you, Matt, but I really like them very much and I love their work. So that's great. And we also have people from Eurimage, Roberto Ola, and Marion Doring from the European Film Academy, as well as Hervé Riber from Croatia. So.
Yeah, you got some people representing the creme de la creme of European filmmaking there.
Well, I mean, they're good people to talk to, and also we were keen on making sure that people could actually feel free to imagine things for the future, because it seems like one of these moments where you have to inspire and let yourself be inspired. So you have to have room for that in your head, and sometimes when you're just managing the next crisis, you don't have that sort of brain space, and we're hoping to gain a little bit of ground there.
Well, this is the 40th, the 40th anniversary of the Federation, FERA, right? We can call it that, right? And so I'm thinking, we mentioned the future. It's a good time to reflect on the past, but also, what do you see the future of FERA being like?
Well, the future is always very uncertain. I mean, this industry and the cinema industry in Europe in general has been pegged as on the verge of death for a long, long time, so
since its birth.
Exactly. So I'm always very hopeful. I believe that we can manage pretty much everything that these times are going to throw at us. But at the same time, there is no denying that our federation is not the biggest organization out there. We're not the most, the super well resourced. So we just hope that with, support from our membership and a good and steady proposition, we will still be relevant in the next few years. And so far, I mean, we've always had a strong sense of community to carry us through thick and thin. So I'm hopeful, I would say, and I think we have a lot of fights in the near future. So it will be good to still be around to do that. Yeah.
All right, Pauline. Thank you very much for joining us.
Sure, it was my pleasure.
Fred Film Radio.
All right, folks, I gotta tell you something. That's all for this episode of the Big Fred Tuesday. I hope the meal was to your liking. Top marks to you if you can get what film I just referenced there. If you did, you are a true cinephile. I speak your name, and I salute you. But we're just about ready to wrap things up here at the BFT, but before I bid you farewell, here's a couple more recent news and announcements from the world of film. Fictional rock band Spinal Tap from the beloved 1984 mockumentary This Is Spinal Tap will reunite for a one-time only virtual event with the film's director Rob Reiner, who also starred in the film. The band included Christopher Guest, Harry Shearer and Michael McKean, and the reunion will be hosted by comedian Patton Oswalt. The event, which is set to take place on the 14th of October, will raise funds for Democrats in Pennsylvania, a traditional swing state that is likely to be a deciding factor in next month's presidential election. Submissions are now open for Prague Shorts, the International Short Film Festival of the Czech capital city, the 16th edition of which is set to take place in February 2021. Films can be submitted for the international competition, the national competition, the midnight program, and the VR cinema strand. The festival will also include an experimental film strand named Labo and the late night program named Brutal Relax Show. And finally, actor and filmmaker George Clooney will deliver a virtual screen talk at the 64th BFI London Film Festival. During the talk, Clooney will discuss his career and his latest feature, The Midnight Sky, which will be released by Netflix in December. Other festival screen talks will be delivered by Christian Petzold, Michel Franco, Tsai Ming Liang, and David Byrne, among others. The BFI London Film Festival will run from the 7th to the 18th of October. With that, people of the universe, we really have come to the end of this episode of the Big Fred Tuesday. Thank you so much for listening. As ever, it's been a pleasure for me to spend some quality time with you. I remind you that you can listen to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interviews with film people from all corners of the globe and in various languages too on Fred.fm, and I encourage that you do so if cinema is your thing. I will return for a brand new episode of the BFT, aka the Big Fred Tuesday, next week. But for now, stay healthy, stay safe, stay strong, and stay tuned to Fred Film Radio, the Festival Insider.
Fred.
This is Cristiana Palmieri for Fred Film Radio from the Sydney Film Festival.
My name is Roberto Pombo, here on Fred Film Radio, the Festival Insider.
Io sono Laura Buffa e questa è una nuova puntata di Fred Mag.
Mein Name ist Beatrice Beden und ich spreche mit Andreas Putschaska.
Fred, the festival experience in 23 languages.
Fred Film Radio.
24/7 on Fred.fm and smartphone apps.